And we're live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the DML Commons Professional Pathways course. My name is Rocky Santo of Indiana University and Hive Research Lab, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Dixie Ching from New York University and Hive Research Lab, and Adam York from CU Boulder. And we have a fantastic panel of folks today that are going to talk with us about navigating to and through kind of career opportunities, sharing stories from their professional lives about how they took advantage of different resources and different moments in their career to find themselves and move themselves forward into the amazing kind of positions they are today. They're going to be introducing themselves and sharing their stories, but we've got a range of folks from both the museum world, places like the Exploratorium and the Museum of Natural History, as well as the venture capital, or more rather tech space, David Hatfield from Kidaptive, folks that are in nonprofit spaces, folks that are also in more traditional academic appointments. So we're really going to talk about the kind of range of ways that we can move through. So that's sort of the topic. If you are listening to the Hangout and you access it through the DML Commons website, if you click just below the live stream, there's an Etherpad that we're using to coordinate activities and resources. Just click below. The Etherpad is, the web address is etherpad.mozilla.org/DMLCommonsUnit4. And once you get yourself in there, you can add yourself to the roll call, and you'll see an agenda, and you'll be able to participate in there. We encourage you to go there. The other way to participate is through the DML Commons hashtag DML Commons, where you can tweet questions and comments and inspiring quotes for the rest of the world to hear. But in general, we'll be going through is we have a little welcoming activity that I believe Adam is going to bring us through. Then our guests are going to be kind of sharing kind of consequential moments in their career, and then we're going to be kind of taking questions from the audience. So as you have questions, please do pop them in. You can see the questions are on line 58 to line 65, or keep on adding those. And we also have a section at the bottom around a crowdsourced resource list. We know there's actually a number of very concrete kind of resources for understanding what kind of professional opportunities are out there, as well as a couple of examples of very strong kind of online presences and ways to position yourself professionally. So you can see that starting on line 67. So that's basically what we're up to, and I'm going to hand it over to Adam and Dixie to get us going.
All right. Welcome, everybody. We have a fun activity to get us started here. So check out right around line 37. You are meandering through the twisting paths in the forest of professional growth, and you encounter an especially tricky obstacle. But you're in luck. A magical unicorn, magical rainbow, sorry, I missed the word there. Magical rainbow unicorn appears and offers to create a resource that would help you overcome that obstacle. So our question, oh, and it looks like someone has added a link to an image if you need some visual aid. Our questions for everybody, all our guests and everybody attending on the Etherpad, if you could please write what is a resource that you would love for this magical rainbow unicorn to create for you, and what obstacle is it addressing for you? And so if you could write in those comments, and then as those start to populate, if you could also fill in if you actually know of a resource that would fit someone's need, you could answer them right there in the Etherpad. So go ahead and get started. We'll take a few minutes with that.
Oops, sorry about that. I just realized I was muted. I was just saying there's a couple of people I'm seeing that are just joining the Etherpad, so feel free to add your name into the roll call. And we're all working on this little activity right now where we're talking about what a magical rainbow professionally helpful unicorn would be able to do for us as we're navigating our careers. And you can jump into lines 47 down. To see kind of like what is this black box of a mystical creature that suddenly is able to help us. Add yours in. So I'm seeing a couple of ones that are similar. Line 50 got like, how do we decide whether or not to take up different job opportunities? Same thing with line 54, decide which opportunities to take unicorn. Seeing a lot about social support, supervisors who can be mentors, unicorns you can go out to drinks with, a network of supportive creative friends, listeners, and advocates willing to soundboard ideas. So that kind of network of social support being really critical. How about just a grant writing unicorn? It just writes all the grants for you, like all the grant proposals.
And as you're writing, if you've already written stuff in and you're reading through and it sparks some questions for anybody, feel free to write those questions. And I see one new question popped into the list of questions, or you can go ahead and start looking at those and upvoting which ones you would like to have our panel take on.
Does anyone want to maybe share about what they wrote? If you're in the in the chat here with us on the webinar, add something to what you put down.
All right, it looks like folks maybe have kind of wrapped up adding. So unless anybody has any extra comments. Just looking at the ether chat. Guess we'll get started with the stories. So I'll hand it over to Dixie and get us going with that.
Thank you, Adam. So now, thank you everyone for joining us in that welcome activity. It looks like it was very generative. And now we'll move on to the guest sharing portion of the webinar where we'd like to sort of, instead of just introducing each guest for the Q&A, we thought we'd have each person just tell us a really short anecdote or piece of personal advice that would sort of relate to this issue of how to navigate, this professional opportunity space. The idea was last week we talked mainly about how to sort of construe a professional identity, how to figure out what that should be and how to communicate that to people. And now the idea is that once one has a professional idea, an identity, and an idea around what one wants to pursue, how does one go about doing that? So thought we'd go just start going along down this list that starts on line 61, the Etherpad, and just go around the room and ask folks to just share a little bit. So Preeti, why don't we start with you?
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you for inviting me. And I think so I'm the Director of Youth Learning and Research at AMNH, and there's two ideas that I've been thinking about a lot lately. And one of them for a long, long time, but a lot very recently, which is the value of developing strong writing skills at an early age and how that's been an obstacle in my career. And it continues to be an obstacle, even though I try to work on it. It's sort of on my professional goals list every year. And I think so when I work with young people, one of the things that I'm trying to always encourage them to do is really sharpen their writing skills. And then the other aspect that I've come to understand is the pathways for leadership and growth, which in the museum world, there's actually not that many opportunities for growth in a sort of traditional ladder-like way. And so you have a lot of people who might work in those starter jobs, and then they're all trying to get promoted either in the same museum or in nearby museums, and there aren't that many jobs to move into. So it's very disheartening. And so I've been thinking about what does growth mean, and what does leadership mean? And I've come to understand that yes, the upward movement is about more money, but if you can kind of put that aside for a second, it doesn't have to be an upward movement in a corporate type of ladder. It can be an upward movement that is by getting well known in your field and becoming a leader in your field, but in a sort of lateral way. And to do that, it means getting your opinions out and having informed opinions, but about understanding what other people might be saying as well. And I don't want to reduce it to like really, really good networking skills, because I don't think it's only in today's day and age about going to a lot of conferences and going to a lot of meetings, but also just being, if social media works as a tool for a person, being on social media, or just being present, being seen, not necessarily being sort of the chatterbox at every conference. And I think that starts to develop that leadership circle that eventually will maybe get to more money, but you don't get disgruntled because you don't feel like there's no obvious job for you at your institution or at a nearby institution.
Thanks, Preeti. One maybe quick question. You talked about the importance of writing skills. I'm wondering if you can link that for us to this broader question of navigating career opportunities. Where do you see the relation between those two? Why did you mention that?
I mentioned that because it was always I felt an obstacle to me considering my next career. And when I decided to pursue doctoral work, of course there were many reasons for that, but one of them was that I knew that I would be forced to develop my writing skills, and I would be forced to learn how to read the types of articles and studies and research work that I need in order for me to be taken seriously in my next level of work. And I don't know that that's a common reason for most people who pursue doctoral work. I think I was somewhat special and unique in that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. We're going to keep the roll call here moving. I think the next person we're going to hear from is Erica Halverson. Erica, what can you share about kind of particular moments in your journey?
Well, I've been thinking about it this whole time because probably like a lot of people, I wish I could say that everything that I've done in terms of career decisions has been purposeful and directed toward advancing my career, but I actually think none of that is true for me.
It's very fascinating because you're doing so awesome.
Well, so one thing I think that I have done well is that I never acquiesced to the role over the kinds of substantive work that I wanted to do. And that was always really important to me because, frankly, I don't care as much about the job as I do about the kinds of work that I do. And so my passion is the intersection between art making and learning, and has always been that. And like Preeti, maybe I went to graduate school not because I wanted to be an academic, but because I wanted to get smarter about how people learn in and through the arts. And so what that's meant for my career, I think, is that I had to take more of a long game look. So I don't know if this is what people want to hear, but I applied for 15 grants before one got funded. And in part that was because I wasn't really willing to go for opportunities that took me off the path about which I was passionate. And I just kept pounding on it until either I found an opportunity that fit, or in part because I like to think the academic world caught up to the ideas that I thought were worth pursuing 10 years before that. And so I guess my main piece of advice is that there are two parallel things happening in an academic career. One is the content and the substantive work, and the other is the job, and they're not the same. And so my advice would be to think about what is the substantive work you want to pursue, and how does that intersect with the various kinds of jobs that you can do, and to look for opportunities at that intersection, knowing that there is more than one. But I will say that, and maybe that will help spark other questions and other people's conversations.
That's great. That's such great advice. Sorry, everyone, my computer had froze. So thank you, Rafi and Adam, for filling in. And I just caught the latter bit of what you just said, Erica, and I think that's great. And I'm so glad the research world caught up with what your passion. So next, David Hatfield, can you share some advice, please?
Sure. I think it's a sort of similar tone to what Erica was just saying. I ultimately ended up leaving academia. I think I realized relatively early on that I was probably going to do so. But I wanted to share just an interesting experience just after I finished the degree. I'd applied for a U.S. Geological Survey fellowship. My degree was in learning sciences, designing games, and so you might wonder, what was the U.S. Geological Survey doing worrying about games? But they had this really interesting project where they seemed to be wanting to stretch to explore using simulation games to explain the kinds of complex technical materials that their researchers were producing to policymakers and the public. They had this great fellowship opportunity out in the Bay Area, very exciting. And this was my first real shot at putting out a proposal. They wanted a full proposal with a budget and so forth. At the time, I still have a wife and 2 kids. At the time, they were much younger. This was going to be a big move for us from the Midwest out to the Bay. And I totally worked the network. I talked to everybody I knew, help me out with this proposal, put all this work into it, did a couple of phone interviews. Everything seemed to be going great, and then right as we were sort of getting ready to make plans to move, found out that it got dinged. And I was just incredibly bummed because it seemed like everything was working. It was all, the ideas were solid. The people seemed to be interested, and it just didn't pan out. And so one of the things that I did was actually pursue the director to set up a phone interview to debrief about what had happened. And it took me a couple of months to actually get a call back from this person, and found out that it was actually as I had thought. Everybody thought it was a great idea. It was really interesting, and at the last minute, the budget got cut. So my takeaway was really, even though I didn't end up doing that project, was that the ideas were super strong, that in fact you could do all this great work, and that this was an area that I really wanted to be doing work in. And then sort of strangely, about 4 months later, over the course of a week, found out about and ended up getting the job that I'm in now with Cadaptive in the Bay Area. So I think being flexible, sort of pouring yourself into the prospect as much as possible, and learning as much as you can from it as you go, were sort of keys for me.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that story. And I think that's a great strategy to seek feedback on things, even if you don't get the ultimate outcome, but to still sort of follow up and learn from that. Thank you, David. And next we have Molly Shea from the Exploratorium. Hello.
Hi. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here, and also really excited to hear from other folks on the call, because I wholeheartedly share both the idea that, the job that, so I work at the Exploratorium. I'm the director of the Center for Informal Learning in Schools. And so I wanted to just say, from what Erica said, I wholeheartedly agree, and it's sort of helping me think about, my next, I actually have my review, my performance review next hour. So I just wrote a self-evaluation, and one of the questions was like, what are you looking to do in the next couple of years within your job? And realizing that the content is sort of keeping an eye on the passion that you have, like why you went into a PhD, or what really inspires you still, what you hold on to. I know some of the passion can die away as you're writing your dissertation, or get dinged for a grant that you thought you had, but that those ideas are something that continue to keep me interested in the work and passionate about the work. And then the second thing that I, from what David had said, I feel like I continue to learn. I think I've probably learned more about academia since I've left academia, just in terms of folks who decided to leave, people who left and came back, that what remains is that there's a vision for ultimately improving sort of education, research, learning environments for kids, that for me it's been really important to hold on to my interest in creating new forms of learning environments or new trajectories for kids who aren't at the top of the education system given that it's pretty unequal the way it's set up. So for me, I think that having a broad, in finding this job, I think I had a pretty broad net of thinking about what I was passionate about and trying to fit it into multiple kinds of jobs, both academic and non-academic tracks, and really just trying to listen to that little voice that had me thinking that there was something important, there's important work out there that I wanted to contribute to, and trying to figure out what are some interesting institutions, what are some great organizations, and what are really interesting projects and people that I can work with. So while the Exploratorium, it wasn't the most direct route into doing the work that I'm doing now, it has been exceptionally valuable, and sort of wholeheartedly I've learned from every person that I've been working with, and we have a really strong team. Having said that, I think that there are things that academia offers that the Exploratorium can't offer just based on the institution that you're in. So some of the things that really outlining your own content area in a non-academic job is much harder, I think, and you don't have as much flexibility to write, I would say. So I think that those are things to keep in mind. If you really have an interest in writing academically, I'm still trying to do that from the Exploratorium, but it's just much harder. Some things that are better about sort of non-academic positions, I would say, is the flexibility to, throw yourself into something, join a small network, write grants with other institutions. It seems slightly more flexible at times than an academic position could be. So all in all, I think that just keeping an eye on what brought you into the field, or what you're currently interested in now that you're finished with your dissertation and hoping to move into a career.
Thank you for laying out the pros and cons. That was really interesting, and I really am taking to heart this idea of articulating what one might want to do or what I want to do, and then that kind of opens up the possibilities of where that can happen, and not to think so squarely in the academic, non-academic sort of paradigm. So thank you. And next we have Laurie Takeuchi from the Cooney Center.
Hi, I'm Laurie Takeuchi. I'm a Senior Director and Research Scientist at the Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop. I think I took your instructions pretty, maybe too specifically, because I feel like they're very tactical about getting a job. But maybe I should just sort of preface my little spiel, just to say that I actually worked for several years before going back to get my PhD. So I worked in public television, and then I worked as a educational software designer, so then all 10 years before going back to school. So what I'm going to say is that in getting each job that I've had over the course of my career, including the job that I have right now, I've really had the good fortune of connections. So I think like I said, every position I've ever gotten, I've done so because I knew someone in a respectable position who was able to endorse my talents and accomplishments. So I feel like I've been very lucky in this way. But the way I even got exposure to those well-known scholars or senior executives in the first place was through my low-level work for them. So whether it be as a research assistant or an intern or that type of thing, I think we sort of undervalue the roles that we play when we're just an RA or an intern. But for me, those have always worked out really well. So just to say, who you know is actually really important. The thing is, and this is the big caveat for me, is that I am such an introvert, and there's nothing I hate more than networking and promoting myself, and I am so not a social butterfly. Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to do is encouraging those of you who also hate schmoozing, that you can still get far through your networks simply by doing good work. The people that matter will take notice and help you get to the places that you want to go. So rather than just focusing on making lots and lots of connections and, tweeting a lot and, posting stuff on Facebook a lot, also be sure to develop those really quality relationships. So for me, I would say that it's really been a matter of quality over quantity. So again, I think it's for just, this subset of people who may be, like me, a little more introverted. Okay, so that's my first point. And then the other one I want to say is, so I've been at the Cooney Center for 7 years now, believe it or not, Dixie. And every year we hire a fellow. And I actually started at the Cooney Center as a fellow 8 years ago. Is that possible? Maybe it was 7. I've lost track. In any case, so every year since I stopped being the fellow and became director, I've been having to interview what are like the most talented group of postdocs and master students ever. Like if I were to apply for the fellowship today, I would never get it. But what's so interesting is that the people who come through and interview for the fellowship position, they often it turns into one of these therapeutic sessions with them during the interview, which is kind of cool. They're like, I actually really don't know what I want to do. I don't know if I want to go into academia. I don't know if I want to do a media job. I don't know if I want to make stuff. And that's okay, I think, because the thing is that the fellows that we eventually hire, yeah, they don't know what they want to do, and they spend their fellowship year kind of figuring it out. So I guess my word of advice would be, don't be hard on yourself if you don't know exactly what you want to do when you get your PhD. Fellowships are actually, and postdocs are actually a really good time to try to figure things out, and you might want to consider that as an option if you're not sure. And again, just don't be hard on yourself. That's it.
That's great. And it's great to know that all this hard gut work I've been doing will pay dividends soon. And you mentioned this Cooney Center fellowship. When is a good time to start looking out for those?
So I would start looking out for it in February, early February. Go to our website, and I posted the link on our page that we're all linked to, and the applications. So we post the call for applications in February, and then usually they're due in April. So just keep an eye out. Or if you're interested, I should actually put down my contact information. You can just email me, and you can contact me, and I will be sure that you're on the mailing list for who gets the actual application.
Great. And yes, for everyone, all our special guests, and just reflecting on the welcome activity, there was this sense that it would be great to have a community, have a network to ask questions, seek advice. So if anybody is interested in putting their contact information in the Etherpad and to invite folks to reach out, please feel free to do so. I'm sure folks on the call would really value that. And great. Last but certainly not least, Peter Wardrip.
I'd first like to echo what Laurie talked about as far as the value of connections and getting jobs, and I found that's been something valuable for me. And as I think about, so I'm a researcher at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, and I feel like I'm smack dab in my circuitous professional path right now. And I think two things that have been really helpful for me as far as making connections and networking, since I don't see myself as being the one who approaches people in the receptions at conferences or approaches a speaker after a talk, is one is to really leverage the brokers in my own network. So, and I'm sure we all have them, the very gregarious, well-connected people in our own lives. And I've been lucky enough to have several early career friends who know lots of people and are able to make connections for me when it's otherwise difficult to make cold calls or approach people on my own. And I think one other thing that I've found sort of helpful in my current path is going to conferences that are a little bit outside of my own domain. So I guess the value of going to a conference sometimes, aside from connections, is it gives you a way to shape your professional identity, because you find people who are sort of like you or not like you, and that provides a way for you to define yourself, and that's something that I struggle with. But so a conference that I went to that I found really helpful was the Computer Supported Cooperative Work Conference. So there weren't a lot of learning scientists there. there were a lot of people, technologists and anthropologists, that were interested in similar problems that I'm interested in, but just in different settings. So instead of schools and museums, they were interested in technologies to support work in emergency rooms or office spaces. And sort of talking to those people, I sort of was able to, and have been able to, pick out certain elements of who I think I really am, as having these nice contrasting cases, and also find similar sort of vagabonds that ventured into that conference that are also going to be learning scientists.
That's great. I can totally see how talking to folks that you might find in a similar kind of doing similar things but in a different profession could help solidify one's own identity and interests. I think that's a really awesome tip. I'll see you at the next CSCW. So I think that thank you everyone for not only providing a little bit about who you are, but also some advice to our viewers. And I think now we'll go into our bigger Q&A session, part of the webinar. So I'll throw it over to Adam.
Sure. So it looks like some people have voted on questions. We also have a couple of write-ins. I'll start with the one that has the most votes. We have about 20 minutes, so but it would be great if multiple people have answers, if we could all just jump in and take turns. The question that has the most upvotes is how to vet an opportunity. So what are the right questions to ask when you find a job opportunity? And I think, for most of you too, since you've been in maybe multiple positions or you're in a position you really like, what questions did you ask, or what questions do you wish you would have asked before taking any particular job on? And anybody can jump in.
Do you think that question is about what questions did you ask the opportunity, or what questions did you ask of yourself? Because I think those are different, right? So my answer to the what questions do you ask of the opportunity is, do I think this is going to make my life better? And I don't just mean like my career, I mean my life better. So an example of that might be there are exciting academic positions in geographic locations that might not be at the top of your list, right? And the question about that is like, do you think that makes your life better? And not forever, necessarily, but for now. Like David was saying about his family, right? They had sort of geared themselves up to move to the Bay Area, and they thought that would make their life better. And so he figured out a clever way to make that a reality for them. And I think we get in this very, this mode that the hiring party is the client, is the customer, right? And we are the having to sell ourselves. And I get why that's true, and I get why that feels like that's true. But I think the healthiest way to think about it is that it's mutual, and whether or not that opportunity feels like it makes your life better. That's not something that you can ask an employer. So if the question was about what do you ask an employer, that's a bad answer.
That's a great answer, but
I have a response to that. So the fellowship again, it's like, I don't know if this is what I want to do. And what we do is we encourage applicants, or like people who offer the fellowship to talk to other, like, past fellows, and you can do the same thing with a job, is just to ask the hiring person, is there anybody that I can talk to about what their experience has been? Because and they should recognize that it is a mutually selective process. So like it's as much about you selecting the position as them selecting you. So I think whenever there's an opportunity to see what how others have experienced it, ask for that. Ask them, would you mind giving me the name of somebody else who works at about the level that I am, or past fellows or whatever. And people have always found those helpful. And the thing too is that I think that the people that you put them in touch, or the people that you're put in touch with, are generally pretty candid about the pros and the cons. And be sure to ask them about the pros and the cons.
I also have a potential answer for the what kind of question to ask. I think that one thing that's super useful is to try and figure out if there are people there that you could learn from, that you're inspired by, that you could learn from, that they have a career there that you admire. I mean, I think that's something to ask yourself, but I also think that it's something to inquire about when you're discussing, the potential job with the potential employer, is sort of, what kind of mentorship opportunities do they have, and how to be a good mentee, like how to actually get on teams and be collaborators and things like that. I think that's pretty important. Then the second thing I would say is we hired someone recently who one thing my boss and I were both really impressed by was her ability to critique, like gently critique and bring up concerns about the potential job opportunity, because no one knows the critiques better than the people who are hiring in terms of their department, or in terms of sort of like the work that they may ask you to do. And so I think that being able to ask, like, whatever that may be, like, how are you defining this term? I'm confused by that. Things that actually aren't meant to be hurtful, but they're actually meant to push the intellectual thinking and the kind of team member that you might be once you are there, and really listening hard to their answers.
May I add a point about once you're in the job, whether you're taking the job or whether you're the one hiring for the job, I find that that it's not easily communicated on either party what was the reason, what was the big kind of selling point for why a person got the job, or why you offered the job. And recently I've been actually, once the person is here, I've been telling them, there were so many things about you that we loved, but here's something that really stood out to us, and we really hope you bring that right into the front and center. Because I found that I wasn't even saying it, I was just saying it in my head. They didn't know why they were here in my team. And I was expecting them to use that, but they didn't know that. So just even having that conversation of like, you're here now, here's your strength that we saw.
That's great, thank you. Lots of great answers here. And I love how it's in kind of both categories. There's the technical, but it's also a deeply personal process, and you have to ask those bigger questions about your life and happiness and long-term, fulfillment. So that's great. Unless there's any other responses to that one, we'll maybe bump over to another one. This one might be pretty popular for grad students. How to manage the application process. So does anybody have any advice on maybe searching for open applications, how many things to apply for at once, like what's enough and what's too much, or timing of applying in relationship to finishing grad school? So any of those topics, I know people would be interested in hearing some advice.
I mean, I can start, I guess. I think two things, and I'm going to sound like a broken record. You should apply for jobs that you could see yourself taking. And sometimes there are 30 of those jobs that come up, and sometimes there are 3. And now, as a person who has sat on a number of hiring committees, and I'm sure others who've also hired folks can say, it's a pretty clear cut. You'll have qualified people, a larger block of qualified people, and within that block, there's the block of people for whom it's clear they are a good fit for the job. And that's in part because it's a good job for them. And so if you want practice with jobs, I think it's fine to apply for all the jobs. But if you want to focus your energies, I think it is useful to apply for the jobs that you could see yourself doing. in terms of the timing, and folks who are maybe more recently out of grad school can speak to this, but as an advisor, I can say applying for jobs is time consuming. And so because, at least for university jobs, the application period is like beginning of September through beginning of November for submitting applications, that is a hard time to be making significant progress on your dissertation at the same time. And so my suggestion would be have enough of your dissertation done by that time to be able to use it for the application. But know that there will also then be a window after that where you can focus on finishing the dissertation when much less will be happening job-wise, though I know that that is not true for other positions that require a PhD, where filling the position is much closer to the actual start time of the job. But for university positions, I would say do not plan to make a whole lot of progress on your dissertation between the beginning of September and the end of October, as you're focusing kind of on the letter writing, recommendation seeking, publication crafting piece of the job hunt.
And I would actually just jump in, sort of related to that. Don't underestimate, or be careful to make sure that you've made enough progress. I've got two close friends, lab mates, who have been through a process of applying for jobs before they finished, leaving school, taking the job, and then being stuck in what is essentially purgatory, trying to juggle finishing a dissertation and a full-time job at the same time. In both cases, in one case it took 3 years to finish after leaving. The other case is still, he's still working on it. I think there are people who can actually get it done, but it is a Herculean task to do that. Mainly, I think, because you really want to do well in your dissertation, and you probably really want to do well in that job, and that's a lot. So, not that you shouldn't apply for jobs before you're done. As Erica said, you can be at a certain point and know you're sort of in the home stretch and everything is pretty well squared away. But be careful about jumping into that pool on the early side.
That's great advice. I found myself in that position, and so that's a great piece of advice to be cautious when you're taking on new opportunities if you're still trying to finish up other things. Any other words of wisdom on the application process?
Maybe related to both of those, make sure you and your advisor are on the same page around the intersection of finishing your degree and starting a job. Because I think some of those challenges, that load can be shared. And so if your advisor knows where you're at on both sides, that they can help you with that overload.
Thank you.
I had a sort of maybe a little bit of a reflective question that I was curious about posing to this group. We've been approaching this very much from the frame of like personal career trajectories that have put a little bit more of our academic hats on. In our work, Dixie and I study respectively young people's trajectories in her dissertation and kind of organizational trajectories in my dissertation. And a lot of the kind of moves that we make when we try to understand those trajectories is to really look at sort of where a given actor, youth, and organization, in our case, professionals, like where we're intersecting with broader social structures and historical trends and cultural trends. And we've been taking this very person looking out, professional looking out view. And I'm curious I'm just curious if there are any reflections on switching that kind of like foreground into the background and bringing into the conversation more how things that are happening outside of ourselves in broader spaces were consequential or important to pay attention to as we kind of make steps, and then where does the personal kind of hit with that? Like, where's the moment where we intersect and are able to kind of like link into that much broader societal and cultural and structural kind of piece? I don't know if that's too abstract and too academic, but it does come to mind. We're sort of taking this very personal view in, where I think there's a broad societal one that we could also reflect on. I'm seeing heads nodding, so if your head's nodding, go ahead.
I'll take a shot. I think that the way that I've looked at it, I think both are always in play, right? If you're studying something in the world, you're part of that, like, not to get too academic, but, you're Foucault, like, you're never outside of the problem. You're always embedded in it. You're embedded in those structures, and you're interested, hopefully, in both sort of institutions and organizations as well as your own personal growth, and they're not totally separate. So I guess, I think it's very wise to think about some of the longer term challenges or more institutional challenges, and sometimes in navigating my career, that's what did lead to more personal growth or success, was actually looking outside of my own, what I think my own path would be, because it has never been what I thought it would be at the beginning. And so the more that you can kind of understand where institutions are moving, or where the problems lie and how you might contribute to them, at both outside of your own personal trajectory and interests in getting ahead or getting a job. It's like, I think people really resonate when both in the hiring process and just within yourself, like, I just don't think any of us will know who we'll be in 5 years or 10 years. So it would be hard to just try and track out a career without learning along the way. So this is, again, like, maybe too abstract of an answer, but I think that you should always be keeping the world in mind and sort of some of the bigger challenges that are outside of your purview in mind. So, for example, you think that maybe publishing is the only thing, but maybe you start teaching a community college class because you really love teaching, and it's not actually in line with your long-term goals, but it's something that brings you joy, or you recognize that that's a place in the world where you could offer something to that group, and you never know how that will come back around later. So I guess my answer is that, yeah, you should keep a bigger view than your own personal trajectory in mind.
This is a little bit different of an answer, but I think it's related to what Molly was saying. And I can speak this is from my current personal experience. Public universities are taking a beating, and it's hard to work at a public university right now. But it is also, it feels like being part of a movement. And being part of that movement means, like, this is not an easy job. And from what I understand from my colleagues, it has gotten to be a much harder job in the last 10 years for that reason. And I would imagine that public institutions of all kinds are in that position, not just public universities. But I think to acknowledge when you enter into, I think about that a lot when I think about my own personal career, and like that I am a member of a threatened group of people, and it's partly my job to make sure that that's not true, and it's partly my job to make sure that I can train graduate students, which means seeking funding, because our graduate students can't pay to come here unless faculty have funded positions, which comes out of grant writing, right? And to Molly's point, if we're not teaching classes, at least in my state, with most of Wisconsin's undergraduates are not being educated. And so I think a lot about the fact that I work and live in a public institution and what that means in terms of what I've committed to, not in terms of my personal career trajectory, but in terms of what it means to work and live in a large public setting.
These are all great pieces of information, and I really appreciate everything that you all have been sharing. We are running pretty close to the end of time. I don't know if anybody has any last thoughts or... You're all good? So I will just, we really did want to try to crowdsource some resources. I think, you know, what the big lesson from this conversation is that there's not a magic bullet. There's no, you know, magic resource that will solve all the problems, and it's a lot about asking yourself a lot of tough questions and just being open-minded and seeking what's out there. But if you do have any specific concrete resources, we had I added categories for grant writing and fellowships as well, because we had a couple of those pop up that are really good. So just as we're wrapping up here, go ahead and jump in and add anything. We were particularly curious about videos, wikis, that, you know, places where you can go to hear more of these stories from people who have navigated this process themselves. So if you know of any of those things, go ahead and throw them in there. And unless there's anything else from our panelists or facilitators, I think that will conclude our webinar for today.
Thanks.